everyone. Lovely to see you. I have got a bit of a frog in my throat, so I hope you can understand me. So it's the Newlyn Art Colony we're going to be looking at today. Well, in the latter part of the 19th century, Newlyn was a thriving fishing village situated about a mile to the west of Penzance. From the Middle Ages, it had provided the first safe anchorage for boats heading east from Land's End, and by 1873, it was the main fishing centre for the area, with a fleet of 400 boats or luggers, which we can see in the picture in the background with their red sails, engaged in the pilchard, herring and mackerel industries. The influx of visitors into West Cornwall began after the completion of the railway between Truro and Penzance in 1852 and the building of Brunel's Bridge over the River Tamar in 1859. So these two projects opened up Cornwall to the rest of Britain, and by the 1880s there was a flourishing tourist industry. The colony, later known as the Newlyn School, began to form in the early 1880s. With some notable exceptions, the artists were predominantly male, English and middle class. Many had studied together in Paris or Antwerp and been members of the artists' colonies in Brittany before coming to Newlyn. Most treated the village as they had Concarneau and Pont-Aven, that is, visiting for a season or less and then moving on. At least 120 artists are known to have worked in Newlyn between 1880 and 1900, but of these, only about a quarter stayed for a sufficiently significant length of time to be considered true members of the school. The artists were captivated not only by Newlyn's picturesque little houses and cobbled streets huddled together on the side of a steep hill overlooking Mount Spey, but also by its inhabitants, who were suitably picturesque, and although they didn't wear traditional costume like the Breton peasants, their lifestyle was sufficiently different from that of the metropolitan incomers, the artists. And according to one Stanhope Forbes, they seem to fall naturally into their places and to harmonise with the surroundings. The artists of the school shared a unity of vision, a broadly similar approach to painting. They were united in striving for a high degree of naturalism, attempting to record the realities of life around them. This was combined with a concern to capture the effects of a natural light inspired by the French plein air painters, especially Jules Bastien-Lepage, a champion of plein air realism in the 1870s and 80s. They embraced his influence. Authenticity was important, and local people were used as models, set against a background of their homes and streets. For a time, the school was also characterised by the square brush technique. This was the use of flat, wide brushes, which enabled artists to cover large areas of canvas quickly when painting out of doors. They gave the work a subtle vibrancy and blurred outlines. In their day, Interestingly, paintings seen today as being too safe or representational were criticised in their day for the unfinished look this technique gave to the paint surface. And descendants of the artists' models and tradespeople relate with chagrin of how their forebears rejected gifts of paintings because they were so alien to the tastes of the day. Now, I realise I've chosen rather a wide subject, so I've had to concentrate on three of the most significant and longest staying residents. And the first one we're going to talk about is Walter Langley. The picture, the illustration we're looking at is from the front cover of his biography by his son. And it is a self-portrait of Langley made in 1897. And unusually for Langley, it's in oil. And I'll explain why later on. And it shows he has posed himself on the quay at Newlyn. We can see the ships or boats, fishing boats behind him, and the cottages further back. So this is, so he would have been about 40 when this was painted. So Langley was one of the first artists to settle permanently in Newlyn. He was born in Birmingham in 1852, and he is considered by some, mainly his family and other Brummies, to be the pioneer of the colony. Several of you, I'm sure, will have seen his work in Birmingham Art Gallery. Many of the artists who came to Newlyn were from prosperous families and therefore had financial support during their difficult early years. Langley had none of these advantages. He was born into a working class family in a back-to-back house in Lee Bank, the 8th surviving child of 11. He was apprenticed to a lithographic printer at the age of 13 and had a general training in drawing and industrial design at the Birmingham School of Design. He then gained a scholarship to the South Kensington schools to study decorative design, where he formed his ambition to become a painter. And he began to paint in the countryside outside Birmingham and the villages, particularly villages in Worcestershire. From his early 20s, he was a regular exhibitor at the Royal Birmingham Society of Artists, and he gained a reputation as a watercolourist of considerable skill. He visited Newlyn in 1880 for a sketching holiday, but returned to Birmingham. While still working in the lithographic trade, he began to see the possibility of making his living through painting, and he achieved this when a Mr. Thrupp of 66 New Street, Birmingham, a photographer and art dealer, offered him the substantial sum of £500 for a year's work. So, despite the fact that he was now married with 4 children, he gave up his commercial work and in 1882 moved with his family to Newlyn to begin a professional life as an artist. Next picture, please, John. Thank you. So this picture is for Men Must Work and Women Must Weep, a suitably Victorian title. Painted 1883, the year after he arrived in Newlyn. It is 75 centimetres high and 51 centimetres wide, and which is quite large for a watercolour painting, I think. It's based on Charles Kingsley's poem of that title. Oh no, it's not for that title. It's called The Three Fishers of 1851, which is believed to be Langley's favourite poem. Mercifully, it's fairly short, but I will read the beginning of it just to set the context for the painting. 3 fishers went sailing away to the west as the sun went down. Each thought on the woman who loved him the best. The children stood watching them out of the town. For men must work and women must weep, and there's little to earn and many to keep. though the harbour bar be moaning. It portrays the anguish of two women who are watching the stormy sea from their cottage window as they wait for news of their loved one. The alarm had been sounded the previous evening, and they have been waiting all night. The window is on the left. All we can see of it is a deep window recess, illuminated by the cold light of dawn. The light shines on the pair. A young mother in a pink jacket, a long grey skirt, and heavy-looking man's boots is seated in the middle of the picture, slumped forward, her head resting on her hand, and all we can see is her left ear and her head, with her hair parted in the middle, with a bun or plait at the back of her head. Her other arm is cradling a baby, a young baby, to her chest. It is wrapped in a white sheet or blanket, I think it's a sheet, and lies across the mother's lap. The young woman is the very picture of despair. Behind her stands an elderly woman, either her mother or her mother-in-law. She has a comforting hand on the young woman's back. Her other hand is resting on a round table covered in a green cloth with a patterned border. The table is placed before the window through which the older woman is looking, searching the sea for signs of a returning boat. She has a grim expression on her lined and careworn face that seems to have not given up all hope entirely. She's wearing a white bonnet over her grey hair, a faded green and yellow check shawl over her shoulders, and a white apron over her skirt. Could we have the next shot first, please? The painting's extremely powerful, and sorrow is expressed through the quiet monumentality of the figures. They fill most of the picture space. A few incidentals of life at sea, such as the fishing line on the back wall and the rope and net behind the young wife on the right of the picture, identify the seafarer's home, while the knitting on the table and the pink and green patchwork quilt in the bottom right-hand corner. So can we go back one, John, please? Thank you. So the fraying and the patchwork quilt and the fraying footrest in the middle foreground highlight the frugality of the poverty, the frugality, and the industriousness of the family. The fates of the lives of 3 generations are hanging in the balance. The picture exemplifies Langley's astonishing grasp of the medium of watercolour. He really was amazing. He was a brilliant draftsman too. His ability to render different textures is very impressive. However, his insistence on painting in watercolour meant that his works were considered to be of less worth than those in oils, especially by the Royal Academy, which meant a subsequent consequent loss of acclaim and therefore income. However, in 1895, he received a letter from the Uffizi Gallery in Florence asking him to send a portrait of himself, whose name is so distinguished and whose notable works are the boast and honour of modern art. So a huge compliment and recognition for Langley. One can only imagine his feelings of finding himself thus honoured amongst a company that includes Raphael, Rubens, Rembrandt, Velasquez, and nearer his own time, Millet, Rossetti, and Holman Hunt. However, he really felt constrained to paint his self-portrait in oils, because that's what most of the paintings in the Uffizi were in oils. So the portrait we saw right at the beginning, can we go back to the beginning, John, please? That's it. Is one of his few forays into oil painting. So I don't think he's made a bad fist of it. So Langley lived and worked in Newlyn and then Penzance until his death at the age of 70 in 1922. The inscription on his tombstone in Penzance Cemetery reads quite simply, Walter Langley, R.I., that's Royal Institute of Painters in Watercolour, pioneer of the Newlyn Art Colony. So can we now move on to, can we move on ahead to the next one, please, John? That's it, thank you. The next artist I'll be looking at is Stanhope Forbes, who is to the right of this group of artists, the tall, lanky character on the right. There he is. And next to Elizabeth Armstrong Forbes, there is no definite date for this photo. It's the late 1880s, and so she is either his fiancée at this time or his wife, I don't know. And the woman seated with the parasol, it says, is her mother. Her long-suffering mother, who accompanied her all over the world in her travels. But anyway, we'll talk about her later. So Stanhope Forbes. By the time Stanhope Forbes discovered Newlyn in 1884, there were already about 10 artists in the colony, including Langley, his friends from Birmingham, Frank Harris and William Wainwright, Henry Tuke and Frank Bramley. None of those painters are on this photograph. I couldn't, the photograph that does have them all on it was not sufficiently clear enough to use. So these are the lesser known artists here. Please note the variety of headwear, which is quite a feature of both the artists in Newlyn and also their paintings. Stanhope was immediately charmed by Newlyn's narrow cobblestone streets and compared it to Concarneau in Brittany, alluding to that sense of otherness which this remote part of Cornwall evokes, as well as its physical similarities to the Breton landscape and to the growing colony of artists. He was very different from Walter Langley. He came from a wealthy family and had studied at the Royal Academy School in London and in Paris. He painted in oils, and although interested in the local community and their way of life, was less concerned with the hardships and suffering of the local people. His main concern was to capture the true effects of light and atmosphere, and I quote, "that quality of freshness most difficult of attainment by any other means than by painting en plein air, and which one is apt to lose when the work is brought into the studio for completion." He even suggested that the success of a painting was in inverse ratio to the degree of discomfort in which it was painted. As we shall see, he was to be proved right. Next one, please, John. Thank you. So here we have fish sail on a Cornish beach. Oil on canvas, 5 feet wide by 4 feet high. So very shortly after his arrival in Newlyn, Stanhope began work on the painting that was to put him and the Newlyn school on the map. Fish sail on a Cornish beach. He had seen how, when the fishing boats arrived with their catch, people would flock to the beach, both to welcome the ships back home and to buy fish. He wrote to his mother that he could not imagine anything more beautiful than the beach at low water, and wished to be able to paint figures against such a shining mirror. His first, very ambitious plan was to use a canvas 5 feet high by 9 feet long. But because of the sheer impracticalities of wrestling with such a large canvas on a cold and sloppy, his word, beach, on several occasions, in the teeth of a biting onshore east wind, it had to be scaled down to a more manageable 5 by 4 feet. He wrote, "Painting out of doors is no joke, and this picture will be a long, weary job." On one occasion, he says, he sallied forth to have another go at the large picture and got blown about and rained upon, and his model fainted. As well as difficulties with models and weather, he was also hindered by the fact that he could only paint when the sky was grey and the tide was out. He started the painting in February 1884 and finished it the following January, in time for the Royal Academy show in London. It depicts a glistening beach at low tide. In true Bastien Lepage style, the horizon, a slate grey sea, is very high. On the left, the reddish-brown sails of fishing boats lying at anchor are silhouetted against the lightening sky. Smaller rowing boats are bringing the catch ashore towards the large group of men and women gossiping and exchanging the news of the day, standing on the shore, on the edge of the sea. As Newlyn goes about its daily ritual on this cool, clear day, there is no drama, but a timeless quality in the frieze of figures on the expanse of drying sands, which mirrors so many blues and greens and greys of the sea and sky. The foreground is a tour de force of still life of fish displayed for sale on sand in whites and silvery greys, pearly greys. The large white skate in the centre, with its triangular wings and its long tail, is particularly impressive. The woman nearest us on the right is wearing a yellow straw hat trimmed with a black ribbon. She is seated on her fishing basket, and her head is turned away from us as she listens to the fisherman who is standing behind her in the mid-ground of the picture. Or he's standing in front of her, but behind her from where we are looking. He has a grey beard, a brown sou'wester, white sweater and black trousers. He's carrying a white sack over his shoulder, his left shoulder, and carrying a brace of fish in his other hand. To the left of the picture, leaning against a rowing boat, in a greenish rowing boat, is a young woman also looking at the old sailor. We have the next detail, thanks. She's wearing a checked shawl over her head and has a long orangey brown apron made of what looks like sacking over her blue skirt. These three figures and the rowing boat form a triangle, and the end of the boat leads the eye to the group of people behind the fishermen at the water's edge. Okay, can we have the? We have it. We can see a smaller rowing boat there. It's just brought a catch in, and there's a young fisherman carrying it on his head. If that's, yeah. The lovely silhouette of the red sails of the boats, the luggers. Could we have the next one, please, John? So this is where the fish sale is taking place, and one can just make out the auctioneer wearing his tam o' shanter and ringing his bell. And there is another pile of fish in front of him on the sands, on the glistening sands. There's also a horse and cart to the right on the sands. You can really see the glistening water on the sand. Next one, please, John. To the left of the picture, there's a lovely cameo of two fishwives with their heavy fish baskets or creels slung over their shoulders. Oh, well, the one on the right actually is carrying it on her, has the rope or ribbon over her head. Walter Langley painted a painting called Breadwinners, which shows three such women, fishwives, with bent down, carrying these heavy baskets, which leads one to imagine that these women are probably widows, they lost their husbands at sea, and are therefore having to earn their living selling the fish. Very, very hard, heavy work. Jim gives it. Can we go back to the main picture now, please, John? Forbes was gratified to find that Walter Langley, usually known as a stern critic, was extremely complimentary about this picture. He thought it the best picture he had painted. Certainly in this work, more than anything else he ever painted, he truly captured Cornwall's remarkable light. And it's the reflections of the light on the water, made on the water. The critics who saw it at the Royal Academy in 1885 were also greatly impressed. The acclaim it received encouraged other artists to paint en plein air. Forbes was recognised as an innovator, and his leadership was accepted in the growing community. He became known as the father of the Newlyn school. This painting would have been bought by the Chantry Bequest, that is on behalf of the nation, but some critics discerned a Frenchified feel to it, with the square brush technique. It is just discernible in this illustration if one looks at the bottom of the young woman's apron, the orangey, reddish Hessian sacking apron. If you look at the bottom edge, one can see, thank you, John, the diffuse, unclear outline. In fact, all of the edges of hems have this same undefined ending finish. But it was too Frenchified for the Chancery bequest, so it wasn't bought for the nation. Thank you. So Stanhope Forbes lived in Newlyn until his death at the ripe old age of 90 in 1947. He continued to paint the local people and their way of life. His style really did not change. With his wife, Elizabeth Armstrong Forbes, he established the Forbes School of Painting in 1899 in Newlyn, which attracted the attention of Laura Knight and her husband, Harold, who came to visit. They both taught, Stanhope and Elizabeth, his wife, both taught in the school. And they were both active in agitating for Newlyn to have its own art gallery, which it did in 1895. Okay, thank you, John. We move on now. Thank you. So the next artist we're going to look at is Elizabeth Armstrong, or Elizabeth Armstrong Forbes, and May Armstrong. This is a self-portrait she did when she was 23, and it's a dry point etching, only 10 centimeters by 7.6 centimeters, and demonstrates, I think, her deftness and her skill in this medium. When she arrived, chaperoned by her mother, in Newlyn in 1885, Elizabeth had had a remarkably international and successful artistic career, and she was still only 26. She was born in Ontario, Canada, in 1859, the daughter of a civil servant. As his youngest child and only daughter, he doted on her, and she received drawing lessons from the age of 4. At the age of 14, she was sent to London, accompanied by her mother, to study art. They lived with her uncle in Chelsea, who happened to live next to Dante Gabriel Rossetti, but unfortunately Elizabeth never met him. She later studied in and was part of the art scene in New York, Munich, Pont-Aven in Brittany, Holland, and finally London in the early 1880s, where she became friendly with 2 of the most avant-garde artists of the day, James McNeill Whistler and Walter Sickert, and where she learned dry point etching from Mortimer Menpes, who was a pupil and acolyte of Whistler's. She exhibited at the Royal Academy and the Royal Institute of Painters in watercolours, and was a member of the Society of Painter Etchers. She was therefore a respected and independent artist before her arrival in Cornwall, and was initially deeply unimpressed by the masculine atmosphere of the Newlyn artistic community. In fact, she found it so uncongenial that she and her mother soon moved to St Ives, 11 miles away on the north coast. As a Canadian, the cosmopolitan atmosphere of the St Ives artistic community, which attracted artists from as far away as Australia, she felt far more welcome. It was far more to her taste, and she felt far more welcome, especially as she was a woman artist among several other foreign women artists. It's possible that if she had not met Stanhope Forbes in Newlyn at a social gathering in 1885, she would have stayed in St Ives. After 6 months, they got engaged, but did not marry for a further 3 years. During that time, Elizabeth spent long periods in St Ives, but also in London, where, much to Stanhope's displeasure and disapproval, she continued her working association with Whistler and his circle. Elizabeth's artistic activities must have been severely shackled by the restrictions placed on her and any respectable middle-class woman in the last quarter of the 19th century. In all her travels, she'd always needed to be chaperoned by her mother. However, in Brittany in 1882 and Holland in 1884, she had been able, as part of a lively, these are her words, a lively, picturesquely clad bohemian group of men and women, to participate with little hindrance in plein air paintings and to familiarise herself with the pictorial language of the modern realist school. Old buildings, cobbled streets, peasant costumes and traditional customs. But in Newlyn, where painting out of doors was one of the principal tenets of the colony, she quickly discovered that standing in front of an easel on the quay or on the beach, in full view of the passing crowd, contravened prevailing standards of feminine decorum, not least among the locals. Unsurprisingly, she felt uncomfortable and retreated to her net loft studio or painted village interiors. Next one, please, John. So Elizabeth had a special aptitude for and delight in representing children. Although this would have been considered an appropriate subject for a woman to paint at this time, she seems to have more than warmed to her subject. In this painting, School is Out, painted between 1886 and 89, oil on canvas, 105 by 118 centimetres. I'm afraid I haven't worked out what that is in feet. She painted it in 1889, the year she married Stanhope. The schoolroom depicted in School is Out is generally acknowledged to be the national board school in the village of Paul, a mile or so inland from Mousehole and Newlyn. The picture depicts the end of a school day in late spring or summer. The clock on the back wall, if you can see it, I can't because it's something in the way. In the middle of the picture, the top shows. No, I can't. It's got a pendulum hanging down. Thank you, John. Points to 1 minute past 4 o'clock. The children are preparing to go home. The door on the right is open, letting in the bright afternoon light. A young female pupil teacher is standing by it, bending solicitously over the 2 boys and 2 girls who are waiting to leave, perhaps checking that they have everything they should have before going home. She is wearing a white pinafore over a grey dress. Interestingly, the 4 children are all wearing tam o' shanters despite the warm weather. These were brought back from Scotland by the local fishermen on their annual trips in pursuit of the herring shoals, and are therefore authentic. These bobbled hats make frequent appearances in Newlyn scenes. We can see the 2 boys against the light. In contrast to this bright sunny side of the right-hand side of the picture, the left side is more sombre in colour as well as in mood. In the bottom left-hand corner, sitting on a bench, is a young boy, possibly 8 or 9, with his fists pressed into his eyes, crying because presumably he's being kept behind by the teacher. He's dressed all in black, and his bright ginger hair makes a dramatic contrast with the black dress of the teacher seated behind him. She is sitting ramrod straight, ignoring his tears and looking straight ahead, not wishing to engage with anyone. She is young, and it has evidently been a very long and tiring day. Behind her, the sun streams through the window, turning the blinds orange and yellow. Can we see the blinds, John? Can we lower it? That's right. So the sun is streaming through the thin blinds, setting the red hair of the young girl in front of it alight, and highlighting the objects and flowers on the teacher's desk. Can we? Yeah, they look like nasturtiums. It also lights up the group of 5 girls in the centre of the room. The 5 girls. So we've got the 3 together. Yeah. As well as the young classroom assistant or monitress kneeling on the floor in front of the boy. Can you go down there? That's it. Thank you. In front of the boy, putting books into a bag, presumably his. We know she is a monitress, as they were called, because she's slightly older than the other girls. Young girls could become monitresses at the age of 12. Older than the other girls, and she's wearing a black dress with a large white neckerchief or cravat around her neck. Behind her, there are 3 girls standing behind the monitress. Again, the black of her dress contrasting with the light summery dresses of the girls. 2 of them have red hair, at least 2 of them. Can't really tell. The one in the middle has got red hair. And they are laughing or teasing the boy. And local folklore believes that they are his sisters, as is the little girl in front of the window with the red hair. They are wearing summery dresses, one pink, one mauve, and the third red, covered by a pinafore. To the left of them, in the middle of the picture, are a girl in a black tam o' shanter who is helping a younger girl tie the ribbons of her preposterously oversized white bonnet. This is not typical of Cornish bonnets of that period, which were much smaller. It is thought that it may have been one of Elizabeth's props used to add colour, in inverted commas, to her pictures. On the back wall, there is a map, very indistinct. It is probably Europe, and there is also a picture of a duck, but there is not much else on the walls. So the large bonnet is not very authentic, but the authenticity that Elizabeth was looking for, as well as with the accurate portraits of the children and the teachers, they are individualized. The faces of these children was the highly controlled and distinctive effects of light. There are 3 sources of light in the picture. Could we have the whole? Thanks, John. 2 of them, the door on the right and the window on the back wall, are behind figures, thereby throwing the figures into making silhouettes, particularly of the little boy on the right. There's been a certain amount of speculation over the source of the reflections on the floor in the right foreground. At first glance, one might assume that they come from the picture, from the window in the back wall, but closer inspection shows that they cannot be the case because the angles are wrong. They must come from an unseen window on the left, to the left of the teacher. And certainly the actual building in Paul, the National School, has a row of windows along this wall set fairly close together. Yes, it actually bears no relationship to the window in the back in the picture. So there is insufficient evidence to definitely confirm the identity of the school in the picture, but School is Out has acquired, over the 130 years since it was painted, an almost iconic importance in the local community, not only in the village of Paul, but in the surrounding area. It is a charming portrayal of what is considered to be a part of the local heritage, and as such it's a deeply loved picture. Local schools used it in history classes as a teaching aid, and identities have been ascribed to the red-headed girls and the unhappy boy. They are believed to be the Spargo family. A local family. Spargo, I think, is quite a common name, Cornish name in that area. While I was researching this picture, I met descendants of the Spargo family, still living a few miles away from Paul in Penzance, and they're proud to be identified with the picture. So, in other words, the painting has become, through oral transmission, a quasi-historical document, a much-loved quasi-historical document. Elizabeth Forbes, as she came after her marriage to Stanhope, settled into Newlyn, life happily enough, becoming known as the Queen of Newlyn. She continued with her painting. There was never any suggestion, as far as we know, that Stanhope expected that she would give it up, as other artist wives of artists had done before Elizabeth in Newlyn. However, although she loved and excelled in etching, she did not continue with it after her marriage. It has always been assumed that this was because her husband disapproved of her association with Whistler and his circle, but she cited practical difficulties of getting the plates printed, etc. She worked constantly and exhibited widely throughout the 23 years of their marriage in a range of media, as well as writing and illustrating children's books. Sadly, her prolific output was brought to an untimely end by her early death at the age of 53 of cancer in 1911. Now, gosh, yes, I think I'm going to have to finish it there rather abruptly with